I did not even think about putting her into a situation where her chase instinct would be triggered and where she would be able to rehearse disconnecting from a human, because that's what she already had that as a habit, right? Disconnecting from her human times three and going off and chasing and Hi, I'm Kathy Kowalik, and I believe that our dogs connect us to the heart and soul of what really matters in life. So hang out, and we'll take a deep dive into the human-dog connection and explore strategies that will inspire you to create legendary, enlightened partnership with your dog. This is the Enlightened by Dogs podcast. Well, hello there. Kathy Kowalik here, your host of the Enlightened by Dog Show. And I've got a special story that I want to share with you today. I want to talk to you about my beautiful and sweet border collie named Maya. And I have shared her story in the past, but I haven't talked about it in probably a couple of years. And it's such a great story that illustrates the power of partnership and how effective following the partnership principles really is. And yeah, I'm really excited to share this with you. So before I actually dive into the story part, I wanted to give you some backstory and give you an idea of some of the partnership principles that I used during this process of rehabbing Maya after we adopted her at 6 months old and after we were her fourth home, believe it or not, her fourth home at 6 months old. And she was basically uncontrollable. No one could keep her from chasing animals, wild animals, farm animals. She couldn't be contained in a fence or a gate. She was clever enough to figure out how to climb, go over, go under, whatever. And some really, experienced dog people tried all sorts of tactics, some not so good, unfortunately, to try to get through to her and train her to not do these things, because it was certainly really dangerous for her and the animals that she was chasing. So anyway, it's a really beautiful story about the partnership principles. So I thought before I give you the story, I would share with you some of the items that we've been talking about, some of the partnership principles that I've been talking about for a long time now, so that you can start to see them in the story. And they're just quietly woven into the story, and you may miss some of the partnership principles. And so I want to call them out to you before you actually listen to the story. Okay. And so the first partnership principle is that we built our foundation first. And so when Maya first came home, the very first thing I focused on was building our foundation. That was first and foremost. And I wanted to establish trust and confidence, in each other, and, teach her how to communicate with humans and all the things, right? And so foundation first. So even though she looked to be an excellent sheepdog prospect, I did not even think about putting her into a situation where her chase instinct would be triggered and where she would be able to rehearse disconnecting from a human, because that's what she already had that as a habit, right? Disconnecting from her human times three and going off and chasing and working. She was seriously misunderstood by the people the families that had her before she came to me. And there was not a lot of trust for her relative to being attentive and responsive to her humans. You know what I mean? And so I did not want to put her into a circumstance where that old habit would be triggered. And so we really started from scratch. And so, I took the safe, calm, and happy principle to the nth degree, and she never got to see our livestock. I did my best to not, even though we live on a little farm here and they're certainly visible, I did my best to not put her into a situation where she would remember and be able to rehearse that whole habituated behavior of disconnecting and going off to work something on her own and chasing. Okay. And so some of the details of that were certainly role modeling, how we live together as a family. This is what we do. And so, just classical conditioning, tapping into the social animal principles that we use as our partnership lifestyle to meet her three needs of, being heard, being listened to really develop her a strong sense of belonging, not only with me, but in our family, and to help her to feel like she was making a contribution to the family. She was perfect now. So this is a big principle, and I'm going to talk more about that in a future podcast because something came up recently. But yeah, so hold that thought. I will be talking to you about this whole idea of seeing our dogs and ourselves, of course, as being perfect, even when they are grossly misbehaving. So I did that. Meet her where she is. Like, this is where she is. This is who she is. This is what she's coming with. And I just used that information about where she was as a roadmap. Like, you are here, like the signs on the trail or in the mall, whatever. You are here. So this is where we have to start from. So that was a very strong partnership principle that I employed. No timeline. So no pressure. No, I've got to, whip her into shape, so to speak, or, get on her training and, and give her a certain amount of time with which she should be obedient or compliant, so nothing like that. No pressure at all, either in my mind or in real life. So we just took it one day at a time, and I stayed in the dialogue loop with her and made decisions from being present, being attentive and responsive as far as what would be the next baby step in our process. I managed her using our clarity chart, right? So does this decision, this choice I'm about to make, build trust? Does it build confidence? And is it a step toward our desired outcome, our goal, so to speak, our destination? So that was the thought process that I used every time I made a decision as far as what's our next baby step. I didn't do any training, so I had no training of behaviors. I didn't spend any significant time with sit, down, stay, place, whatever, come, nothing like that. I didn't do any of that. Zero. I did a little bit of clicker training, sit, stay, down, right before I started her herding training, but not before then. So she became an attentive, responsive, and well-behaved dog without me training any behaviors. So I focused on our partnership, on our relationship first. So building trust and confidence was top of the list all the time, right? Let's see what else. Dance steps. So as part of a partnership lifestyle, we work on the dance steps. And so that's just a part of our lifestyle, who I am and how I interact with my dogs. And so she became very familiar with the dance steps, including like the dance imitation that I share with you. And she became very familiar with the communication through the 3 Ps. And we became competent communicators. Like, we were able to dialogue together. So that was a big part of it. And only when our foundation was solid and our partnership was good, and we had like a solid amount of trust and confidence in each other, and I could see that we could be attentive and responsive to one another, only then did I begin her formal training. Make sense? And when I did begin her formal training, which for me, that's sheepdog training. For you, it could be something else. For you, it could be agility training or rally or therapy or a hiking companion, whatever, whatever your training next thing is, it's important for us to first have a foundation that is built on trust and confidence and communication so that we know how to dialogue. Because if we don't have that, then it's really difficult to move into training without relying on transactions for everything, right? Without having a solid relationship and a partnership, everything becomes transactional. And we don't want that. That's not why we have dogs in our life. Okay? So that's the backstory. I wanted to point out a few of the key partnership principles, and you'll hear them subtly woven into my telling of Maya's story. So I hope that this inspires you with your difficult dog. Maybe you have a rescue dog. Maybe you have a dog that you adopted as a young puppy. And even in spite of your best efforts, it didn't go well. And your dog has a lot of unwanted behaviors, and there's a big communication gap and a deficient relationship between you and your dog. In any case, it's okay. We just start where we are and we keep moving forward. So I hope that this story inspires you to do that with your dog. All right. So I'm going to get this story queued up right now. Enjoy. At 6 months old, she'd already been labeled as untrainable by 3 homes. She worked kids until they cried. She chased horses into fences, putting herself and them at serious risk of injury. There just wasn't a fence that could keep her from chasing everything, including the neighbor's cattle at her last, where she was likely to get killed either by the cattle or by the farmer. So as it turns out, I was kind of her last shot, her 4th chance. And if I didn't agree to take her, the unspeakable was going to happen. And so, yep, all this drama at the very young age of 6 months old. Can you believe that? So, I'm thinking like, well, how hard could it be to train a 6-month-old border collie? I mean, they're like crazy smart. They want to please you. They're dying to partner with you. They live for that. And I'm thinking, okay, how bad could it be? So yes, bring her down. I'll take her. And yeah. So when she arrived the first day, I could definitely see her working potential, because I had her out in the yard with a couple of my dogs, and her moves were brilliant. She had beautiful flanks, like perfect balance. And I'm thinking, wow, like she's like a sheepdog in the raw with that drive and those moves. And so I thought, well, she's got a lot of potential in so many ways. And I was pretty excited about it. Well, the very next day, we were out in the pasture. I take my dogs for walks every morning, and we go out through the pasture and then out into the unfenced area. We walk along the creek and we have some fun and etc. So that's our morning routine. So the very next day, I took her out into the pasture with my pack of border collies for our morning walk. And my intention was to put a leash on her before we left the fenced pasture area. And I had it in my hand. I was carrying it. Well, she was so wild and so distracted by the movement of my dogs that it took me 20 minutes to get her to stay close to me, like near me, long enough that I could snap the leash on her. I mean, it was crazy. Anytime a dog moved, she was off like a shot working them. And I mean, I'm not talking about big moves. Like, well, at first there were big moves, but then I had everyone like lay down. So everyone was very quiet and still. But I mean, like if an ear twitched, she'd go off. So I would have everyone really still, and then I would invite her to come to me. I'd call her over, and she would come because she was really sweet and she wanted to please, but she would get really distracted by any movement, right? So everyone was still. I'd call her over to me and she would be like almost there. And then someone would like move their head or an ear would twitch and off she'd go. So 20 minutes later, I finally got her leash snapped on. It was absolutely crazy. I mean, 20 minutes seemed like a lifetime, especially to my other dogs, I'm sure. So that's how we started out. That was our first day. Now, the very next day, we were out going through the pasture, and Phoenix, who was, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 or 6 at the time, a young dog. Well, she had picked up a stick from the ground that she just found, and she was, walking around, running around with it, playing, as we were going through the pasture. Well, Maya came racing up from behind her and wrenched the stick right out of Phoenix's mouth, like without missing a step, like just in stride. She just yanked it out of her mouth. And Phoenix cried, and I'm like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Well, I didn't find out until later that day that she actually broke 2 of Phoenix's teeth off. And the next day, Phoenix had to have emergency surgery to remove the broken teeth from her jaw. I'm like, oh my gosh, like what did I sign myself up for? Woo! So clearly we had a lot of work to do before I could even think of starting her sheepdog herding training. So I spent the next 6 months building a foundation and a partnership with this like sweet and wild pup, right? And one of the first pieces of that was really meeting her need to belong. And I wanted to develop that so she would feel that she belonged to the family and allow her to feel loved and appreciated, because she had a pretty rough start, and because of her behavior, she did not get a lot of, reinforcement in that regard. So that was a big piece that I wanted to bring into her new life with us. And as we worked on our lifestyle and our relationship and our partnership, just as part of life, right? That's kind of what I do with all my dogs. It was, it just developed naturally. That's what we work on. And at the same time, I also wanted to meet her need of being heard, and being listened to and being understood. And that happened in a couple, through a couple different aspects. One of the things that happened with her was she was punished quite a bit because of her behaviors. And that punishment led her to be hand shy and very sensitive to a human having something in their hand. And so if I was carrying my purse, or I was carrying what it could be, I don't know, it could be anything, just ordinary life stuff. And if I happened to make a sudden move that was maybe toward her, just like walking through the house, for example, and if she was near me, she would cower and pee, like a flood of pee. She's very well house trained, but she was afraid of being punished and being struck, because that was what had happened to her in her past homes, because she didn't listen. Now, she listened like in the house when there was nothing going on, but she did not listen if there was anything that distracted her that she would want to chase or work. And so I wanted her to be heard in that regard. And that meant that we became, especially me, because, she was with me most of the time. So I was very mindful and very sensitive to her need to relax about humans having something in their hand, to let her know that she was never going to be struck again or punished again, that we would, I heard her need in that regard. And so that happened over, weeks and months, and she got better and better, and she trusted me more, and Joe, and, and her confidence got built up. And so it's one of those things where you have this like dichotomy. You have this like soft, sensitive dog who really wants to please and really wants to partner, but at the same time, like on the other side of that coin, she has this extremely strong drive to work and no real outlet for that, right? And so that combination really put her in a very, very challenging circumstance 3 times. And so finally we were going to help her with that. And so I met her need to be heard in that regard, but also I met her need to be heard when we were out and about with the other dogs as a family group. And so I knew that she had that strong drive to work, moving things. And so my choice was either to not have her out with us, right? And to just like maybe do one-on-one with her and not put her in that situation, or to have her in that situation as a member of the family and show her how to live with us in a way that works for everyone. And so that was my choice. I certainly could have chosen the other thing. But I wanted to integrate her into the family group and allow her that opportunity to learn how to be responsible for, being a member of family. And that's my tactic. That's my method. That's my approach. And so that was my choice. And of course, it worked out really well ultimately. And so I wanted her to be heard in that situation. And so there's a thing that I teach my members, my students, my clients, that it's called the 95% rule. And basically all it means is don't ask your dog to do a thing unless you're 95% or more certain that your dog can do the thing. So it's a pretty simple rule. And so I definitely applied that to her. And so what that means is I never asked her to like come or to stop or to do anything while she was in that work mode, working the other dogs, because I knew she would not, could not, right? It's more like a could not, right? Because she had a well-established pattern of behavior. And so I worked with that. I heard her need and I worked with her. And so I'm going to give you a couple of tips about how I did that, but I want to fast forward to not the end, but to the future of when she was my partner and we were working together. And I'll give you that a little foreshadowing of where we went to, and then I'll come back and give you a couple of tips about how I worked with her. So I ended up starting her sheepdog training when she was about 1 year old. So it was about 6 months, a little bit less than 6 months. And I felt that we finally were in a good place where I could start that work with her. I did not want to start it because she had I didn't want to start it earlier because she had a well-established pattern, a habituated pattern of behavior of working on her own, right? Working and chasing animals without a partner. And I did not want to put her in that situation until I felt that we could partner together. So I started her training at about 1 year old and went really well. She was pretty much brilliant. And at about 2 years old, I started trialing her. So we started competing in nursery and pro novice. At 3 years old, I moved her up to open and she was winning open, placing well and winning open trials. She was a finalist in some of the big double lift trials. At 4 years old, she was a finalist at the USBCHA National Sheepdog Finals, in the championship round. and she was, like in the top 40 in the North American standing. So like, wow, that's like amazing, right? To go from a puppy that was considered to be untrainable, and there was no amount of harsh treatment or punishment that could get her to stop doing what she was doing and behave, to being the most amazing partner. Really, really awesome. Okay, so now back to our work together as a family group. So what I did was role model for her how we live together as a family group. And so one of the things that I teach in my, in my work and like teach to my members is something that I call the dance. And one of the dance steps is called the invitation. So that's the first dance step. And so what I would do is, while she was working the other dogs, so if there were other dogs, she was working them. And what I would do is invite the dog that she was working into me. And so that dog would respond to my invitation by moving toward me. And then the dog would come to me. And of course, Maya would stop because that dog was stopped when it arrived at me, right? And so I love on that dog like I do. And then off they'd go. And then we were done and off they'd go. And I just repeated that. And what happened after a few, I don't know, maybe a week of that, was that I could see that she was noticing the invitations and she was starting to respond to my invitation, even though it was directed at another dog. Now, she was also exposed to the invitation, like in the house, when there was not much exciting going on. So she also, had that experience as well. But I could see her starting to respond. And ultimately, I could start to invite her when I would look for moments when she wasn't like extremely engrossed in working another dog, and she would respond well to that invitation. And then ultimately, over in a couple months' time, no matter what she was doing, she could be 50, running out with one of the other dogs 50 yards away from me and flanking out in a big outrun to head that dog off. And halfway out there, I could call her name and invite her to me, and she would instantly stop working that dog and come to me. And so it was quite the transformation, and ultimately it was that work that we did, that relationship and partnership work and the role modeling and allowing her to learn that I was someone that she could look up to, that she could look to for guidance and support, that she could look to as her loving leader. All of that transferred directly into our being able to partner so brilliantly in the sheepdog world. And so that's our story. And I would invite you to, look at some of these concepts and bring them into your own life with your dogs, and to consider how you might, use the 95% rule, or how you listen to your own dogs and help them develop a stronger sense of belonging. And the third piece, the contribution piece, of course, she contributed to the family group as being my helper with the sheep, right? So she was my sheepdog helper. So she definitely had a big contribution that way. And she contributed as being, my working partner and my trial partner, which was awesome. We had a lot of fun doing that. But also, interestingly, she developed into being the most amazing auntie. And so one of her big family contributions, which I always acknowledged her for, was helping to raise puppies. And so whenever we brought a puppy into the family, she just was the perfect auntie. So right from the time I've raised a couple of litters. So right from the time they were little puppies, 4 weeks old, all the way on up. So whether she always had perfect pitch. And so she was very tolerant. And she's about 12 and a half years old now, and she's retired from her tech work, but she's an awesome member of the family. But she always had perfect pitch with the puppy. So whether they were, 4 weeks old or 8 weeks old or 12 weeks old or 6 months old, she was tolerant and patient, but also set very, very clear boundaries and communicated those boundaries in a extremely appropriate way for the age of that pup. Always communicating very clear without escalating and without scaring the puppy, but making her boundaries very well known and clearly accepted by the puppy. So just perfect pitch. So she is the perfect anti-dog, right? So I love her for that, in addition to so many other things. So I hope that inspires you, that no matter how ill-behaved your dog might be, no matter what history your dog might have, I hope you are inspired to think about the possibilities of amazing and brilliant partnership. So that's all. I'm going to leave you with that today. Have a great day and be brilliant. Thanks so much for listening. And hey, if you would like to work with me so that I can help you discover the missing pieces you need so that you and your dog can finally be happy and enjoy life together, then head on over to dancingheartsdogacademy.com and request your invitation to join us in the Brilliant Partners Academy when the doors open for the next enrollment. See you next time, and remember, a brilliant partnership with your dog makes your whole life brilliant.